All right, well, thank you guys. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for having me. I wanted to start actually with just a word about how I'm kind of structured my talk here today, because my goal is really to kind of share my experience so that we can use it as something to learn from. I'm a business sustainability practitioner, having started 2 companies that are trying to use business to create impact. And my goal here is actually just to share my principles and my approach, not as a way of saying that should be your approach, but really to highlight the fact that having an approach is actually the first and most important thing when it comes to business sustainability. And then from there, hopefully turn this into more of a discussion. So I'm not going to take all the time talking. What I am going to do is hit the tops of the waves a little bit. I'm going to talk about my approach, my principles. I'm going to give a couple of examples, but those examples aren't going to have a ton of detail around their sustainability. If you want to hear more about those things, then ask me. We can go into whatever depth you want to go into, but for the scope of this talk, I've kept it at a little bit of a higher level. So first of all, the 2 companies that I've started. The first one is Method Cleaning Products. I'm going to assume that probably most of you have heard of this one. So this is a company that I started in 2000 and started by, I'm a chemical engineer, I started by making lotions and potions with beer pitchers in my apartment in San Francisco that I shared with 4 other Stanford grads. Perhaps the most ironic place in the world for a cleaning products company to be born. It's a place where 5 25-year-old men live. And started selling it door to door to grocery stores around the Bay Area. Today, Method's the largest and fastest growing green cleaning company anywhere in the world, and is doing business on 4 different continents. So it's gone from really nothing to something pretty remarkable, and is now really starting to have some pretty profound impacts from a sustainability perspective, a couple of which I'll share. In 2015, as Julia mentioned, I stepped down from Method to start another company in the food space. And I did that because I'm motivated by how you use business to create impact. And food is more personal, and it's more impactful than what you put, the chemicals that you have in your home. And so I started this company, Ripple Foods. Ripple's based around a technology to get totally flavorless protein out of plants. So many of you may not realize that all proteins are tasteless. They're too big to hit the taste receptors on your tongue, so if you get pure protein, it has no flavor. What that means is it means that plant-based foods don't need to taste planty, but they do. And they do because they're not very pure. We've solved that problem technologically, and then we started a company around that to make plant-based foods that were really nutritious, but could also be really delicious. And therefore available to a much broader audience. So this line of products is where we've started. We started in the non-dairy milk space. The reason we started there is those of you that are familiar with this space probably know this already, but nearly all of the products in the non-dairy or in the dairy alternative space are really awful alternatives to dairy. They don't have any protein, which is the #1 nutritional benefit of milk. And they're thin, they're watery, they're chalky, kind of everybody knows this. And so we started using yellow peas as a feedstock. We can actually use any feedstock we want that contains protein. And we developed a line of products that have the same protein content as milk, even better nutritional content, rich, creamy, delicious. Please go out and try them. My future is depending on it. But this is not, I'm not here to pitch you Ripple Foods. What I am here is to talk about what these 2 businesses have in common and what I'm trying to do with these businesses, more than just, grow them and sell a lot of milk or sell a lot of soap. So that's what I'm going to kind of go into now. So first of all, I wanted to share a couple of things about my approach to sustainable business. The first one is that building a sustainable business really starts with a design problem. And that design problem is, how do I align the financial interests of the business with the social impacts of the business and the environmental interests of all of the stakeholders so that all those things are going in the same direction? And there are obvious examples where those things are out of whack, right? Like a fossil fuel energy company, right? Obviously, they're trying to make money, but the more money they make, the more carbon emissions they have. Everybody can kind of grasp that one. But even as you get into the world of sustainable businesses, I'm less in favor of some of the models that I see in those places. So one I call the siphon and donate model. And so this is where, hey, I've got a business and it's doing sustainability stuff and we care about the world. So we're going to take our profits and we're going to take part of our profits and we're going to donate them to nonprofits. I'm not a fan of that model. And I'm not a fan of that model because the core assumption of that model is that the money is better spent through a nonprofit than that business innovating, and I don't agree with that. It's the same reason I don't like the one-for-one model, right? And I've never done the one-for-one model, meaning you buy one of these and we'll donate an exact one of those to somebody else that's somebody in need. And it's also why I don't like what I call the decoy model, which you guys would probably agree with, which is I'm a big business that's kind of doing some stuff over here, and I've got this shining example of a product. Just don't look over there. And so for me, it's all about bringing these things together so that all you need to do is grow the business, and then you amplify the positive impacts from a social and environmental standpoint, and you're creating the shareholder value that ultimately fuels further investments in innovation and further impacts that you can create from a sustainability standpoint. And what it does, in essence, is it redefines success in business from obviously just a purely financial metric to something broader and more impactful than that. The second thing that I've really built my businesses around is I think I get most excited about businesses where sustainability is built into the product, meaning it's inherent. It's not something that is bolted on. It's not something that comes later after the product has been made. It's not something that it's like, oh, well, the product's made fair trade, but it's inherently less of a sustainable product. It's something where the impacts environmentally, socially, and financially are all built into the product itself. The third is that win on product, basically. And your product, and this is my point of view, is that you've got to have a product that's going to win despite its sustainability, not because of it. Meaning, if you took the sustainability away from the product, would you still win? If the answer is not yes, it's not for me. And we'll talk about why here in a second. And then lastly, it's got to be mainstream. So I think it's totally pointless to make green products for green people. It's preaching to the converted, and I think that it's frankly not intellectually honest if you're saying I want to do sustainable business to not be doing it for everyone, because that's the whole point. So with my biases now out on the table, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about what I think the challenge of sustainability leadership is, and that is about talking about the problem a little bit. So every one of you is in this room because you understand the sustainability imperative. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. But you also have probably all experienced the fact that it's hard for sustainability to get traction a lot of times. And you probably have a lot of friends that don't think it's as important as you think it is. And why is that? It's first because the problem is really complex, right? I bet if I asked each one of you to define sustainability, I would get, 30 different answers, however many there are here, right? Some of you would define it in very environmental terms, right? You'd talk about carbon and water, waste and that sort of thing. Some of you would talk very much in social terms. Some of you would bring those things together. Some of you would talk about financial elements. Some of you would not. It's a complex problem, and it kind of always will be. So different people, different meanings. That's one challenge that we have. The second is that it's abstract. You can't touch a carbon footprint, right? Water impacts are out there somewhere. How do you know social good when you see it? These are really hard things to make real. You can't pick them up. You can't touch them. And so they're not immediate. And that abstractness creates distance on the problem. And then lastly, they're not urgent. There's always something today that matters more than making progress on these things for tomorrow. And so what you have here is sort of like the perfect problem that humans have evolved not to solve, right? We literally have evolved to solve like problems that are right now and they're immediate and they're threatening. And sustainability is none of those things. So the number one thing that I think that we need to do as practitioners of sustainability leadership is you have to make sustainability simple, you have to make it real, and you have to make it important. That doesn't seem like mind-blowing, right? But we often really forget that this is what ultimately is going to have to happen if we're going to make any progress at all. So I'm going to talk now about sort of 4 things that I think are essential, sort of you could call them strategies or approaches for making sustainability simple, real, and important. The first is having a point of view. I shared a little bit about my principles, but I'm now going to kind of drill it down a little bit more detailed to a business point of view. So the way I like to think about this is you have, if you want to have simple answers, you got to ask simple questions. So the first question is, what is your vision of the future? And that is you as an individual, but I'm really now talking about from a company standpoint. What is, if your company were to answer, what is your vision of the future? Can they answer that question first? Most companies actually can't. They can't answer that beyond our purpose is to make a shareholder value, or we want to not do harm while we make money kind of thing, right? But there's not actually an end state that they can say, I want the world to look like this. And then they often then struggle to say, well, then how does your business bring about that vision? Having a point of view means saying, I can tell you what my vision of the future is, and I can tell you how my business is going to bring it about. Now, again, not a lot of detail, but this is what ours is at Ripple Foods, and Methods was quite similar, especially at the top level. But my philosophy of business, which I've already shared, is really that business, its role in society is to create shared prosperity across economic, environmental, and social factors. And my vision is basically a world of healthy eaters that eat more plant-based just because it's delicious, right? And I say more plant-based because I don't think, nor am I trying to achieve everybody in the world going vegan or vegetarian. I am not a vegetarian. But more people eating a lot more plant-based is a really good way to make progress in the right direction. But that's only going to happen if people enjoy doing it, because food is an experience, and it's got to be delicious. And so that's the vision that we have of the future as a company. And so our mission makes a lot of sense, right? We're just going to make plant-based foods delicious. And as I described before, the whole business started out because we created a technology that allows us to make plant-based foods actually delicious. The second thing is know your warts. And this is really about impacts. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back one thing. So with the defining a point of view, what this really does is it starts to simplify sustainability down to a mission. And it's not about mission statements, and it's not about the types of things you see on the walls of companies, but it's about something that when you ask somebody that works at the company, like, hey, how do you, what's the vision of the future you got, and how does this company do it? They can actually say, oh yeah, they might use a little different words every once in a while here and there, but they say, oh yeah, this is what we do, and this is what we're trying to accomplish, right? That's how you take this world of sustainability, which is carbon and water and waste and fair trade and, workers and all this stuff, and you boil it down to something that people can understand. Okay, now getting on to knowing your warts. So this is really about the science of sustainability, and it's about knowing your impacts. So do you know your impacts as a business, and do you know them at every level? Unfortunately, there are a lot of businesses that skip this step. And most of them are the businesses that you see where sustainability sort of resides in the marketing department, right? And it's about what often happens in these situations is you get sort of led astray by a consumer perception, right? So I'll give, a couple of examples would be bioplastic, right? So bioplastics, compostable plastics, can only be good if you have the recovery system to put them back through the biological cycle to compost them and reconstitute them into materials. You do that here at Stanford, they do it up in San Francisco. It basically doesn't happen anywhere else, right? So the typical sort of green bioplastic cup that you get at a concert, it essentially isn't doing anything. It's giving you a false sense of responsibility that, that you're doing well. Those companies haven't studied the impacts, or they don't care, to realize that when you take that cup and you put it in a landfill, it's going to be there as long as your typical red Solo cup. You know, another example from my industry, almond milk, right? So I'm not talking too much about our industry, but you know, almond milk is an alternative to dairy milk. It takes over a gallon of water to grow a single almond. And 99% of the country's almonds are grown in the Central California, where there is no water. And so there's a huge carbon footprint also of moving all that water to the Central Valley of California. And so here you have, in the name of health and wellness, right, you have companies moving to a direction towards something that's got a nice halo to it, a health halo of almonds are good for you. But again, they either don't know or don't care that the real impacts of that product are actually terrible. And so, you know, what does that look like? I don't mean for you guys to look and study the detail here. The point here is, just using the method example, this is one material. Method uses thousands of different materials. And for every one of them on dozens of environmental and social endpoints, we've mapped through independent third-party reviewed, peer-reviewed science, all of these endpoints, and we can tell the difference between a good material and a bad material. And there's a massive database of these things that we can use to answer any question, which is, what is your impact of this material that you use in this product on aquatic toxicity in this area? I can answer that question. And you've got to be able to answer those types of questions in order to make the sustainability impacts real. And so that people understand that when you use this chemical or you use this product or you trace the end of life of your packaging, you know where it goes. And that's real to people so they can do something about it. The third piece I think is important is showing your warts. And this is one that a lot of companies are really uncomfortable with, which is, are you willing to point out everything that you are doing wrong publicly? What's really important about this is you try to keep it simple with a point of view. You try to make it real by knowing your impacts. The important thing about showing your warts is this is where you make it really urgent and you make it really important, because what you're doing now is you're taking it and you're turning it from just not just a yardstick about how we're doing, but commitments about how we're going to do these things better. For method, you guys are welcome to go look at the method website. You would see this. There's a benefit blueprint. Again, everything from water, carbon, waste. This is a material health score, and the overall company governance and sustainability, how they treat company, community, and workers, and that sort of thing. All there, totally transparent, real time. Goals are there. You can see it. It's a public commitment. And it's something that can be tracked. And it creates urgency and immediacy to get things done. For Ripple, of course, we're a benefit corporation as well. And this is all information, of course, that lives online. We get questions about it all the time. People calling us up and saying, hey, how are you guys going to get better on, when is your board going to get more diverse? I'm working on that one. And the last sort of principle that I'll talk about is innovation. And I'm a big believer that ultimately sustainability will only be solved when we're able to unlock massive amounts of innovation where that sustainability is built in. And that is about asking this question: can you make something better with those principles built in? What this looks like, and again, I'm going to just share a couple really short things so that we can get into the discussion, is when you create something that starts to move a market. Ripple's only a couple of years old, but we've started to get to a place where we're having enough impact on the market that people are starting to copy us, all right? And so that's a good thing. So now there's 2 more products on the market that are made using peas, and now protein is becoming important within the non-dairy milk space. Okay. Examples from the past. So this is a long time ago, but Method created the first sort of ultra-concentrated laundry detergent. Now, this is not an earth-shattering idea. It's harder than it sounds. But laundry detergent is sort of one of the worst abominations from sort of a material standpoint, because if you've ever taken the laundry cap and you look at how much laundry detergent you're supposed to put in, they have this giant cap and this line like way down at the bottom, right? But what does everybody do? They kind of fill the whole thing up and put it in, right? That's getting you to use more product that you don't need. They come in these giant jugs, lots of plastic, lots of water, lots of material wasted. It gets you to buy more, but it's not exactly the way you want to go. So we kind of redesigned the laundry detergent. This product, yes, it was far more sustainable from a water and a waste and a material standpoint. But the reason it was successful is it was the first one-handed laundry detergent. And what happened after that? People started to copy it. Unilever copied it with their All Small and Mighty product. Tide went after that. They all started taking credit for it, which was fantastic. And now actually most of that laundry market is switched to either single-use dosages or ultra-concentrates. And that's sort of interesting. Here's one of the largest consumer categories on the planet, very old, very staid. But an innovation was able to spur sort of a rapid change in the product formats in a place that isn't sustainable, but it's certainly heading in the right direction. And so you get copied. And then it has to go, a couple other quick examples, it has to go beyond the product. So at Method, one of the things that we realized is about 40% of our carbon footprint was distributing our products to our customers. So this was just trucking, right? And we thought, well, how are we going to solve this? And the lesson here is that starting small sometimes works really well if you do it the right way. So what we kind of were daunted by this problem. You know, you've got hundreds of trucks going all around the country every day. And how do you get after that, right? We don't own the trucks. You know, we don't, you know, we're very abstracted from the movement of these materials. We actually got together with J.B. Hunt, which is a big trucker, and we said, you know, how can we get after this thing? And we had the idea for biodiesel. And of course, there were a lot of barriers to this, right? If you use biodiesel in a truck, you void the warranty. Nobody wants to insure it. It's a huge mess. But ultimately, we were able to create one truck, lease one truck, starting on 5% B5, 5% biodiesel, 95% diesel, right? That's totally insignificant from a sustainability standpoint. But what was really interesting is it was a truck that had Method on the side of it. And you could pull it up in front of somebody and you could honk the horn. And 18 months later, we had 15 trucks doing 60% of our volume running on B80 for 3/4 of the year, and we had cut our carbon emissions of that 40% of our carbon footprint by 60%. And it was just because we started really small with one little thing, and because it was cool, people wanted to see more of it. And then that sort of thing can kind of snowball, and this was sort of the kind of crown jewel from a sustainable design standpoint for Method. So in Method was acquired in 2012, went from a venture-backed business to a business that finally had a balance sheet and could start to invest in its own manufacturing facility. This was a facility that we finished in 2014. It's only the second LEED Platinum certified factory in the United States. The other's a Volkswagen factory in Tennessee. It's completely renewably powered. You can see the solar and the 750 kilowatt wind turbine. It's 100% water neutral. It's landfill free. And that is the world's largest rooftop greenhouse on its roof, growing leafy greens in a food desert. It was the first factory of any kind built on the south side of Chicago in more than 30 years. And what was actually most profound about this was actually some of the stories that come from the people that work there. You know, you can imagine that this is a place where people desperately need jobs, bringing green manufacturing jobs. You know, we had people that hadn't worked in 7 years, and now are not only supporting their families, but actually, you know, enjoying for the first time in a long time the work that they were doing. And that is when these things get, the impacts get to a place that, at least for me anyway, it gets very real and gets very personal, because you're really, you can say, I've done all this stuff, and it's starting to have a real meaningful impact on people's lives. So to kind of wrap this thing up, I wanted to ask the question, so where are things going now? Because I think we're actually in a really, really weird and interesting time. So there's a consulting firm called Edelman that puts out what they call a trust barometer. They do this every year in the beginning of the year, which is sort of trust in public institutions like business, government, media. And this was the headline this year, which is America's in crisis. I think we all know the reasons for this. But this is what it looked like. This is the sort of net change in trust by country across the world. You can see that we're in last by a long way, right? This is trust in overall public institutions. If you break it down by what those institutions are, right? NGOs, business, government, media, and this is informed public and general pop. Don't worry too much about that. But what you can see is like everything's just falling off a cliff, right? People just don't trust business anymore. They also don't trust the media. They also don't trust NGOs. It's a disaster, okay? And that's not good. But what does it mean? Also, almost exactly at the same time that came out, so this was middle of January. So Larry Fink, largest asset manager in the world, $6.3 trillion under management, sent out a letter to CEOs everywhere saying that if you don't have a sense of purpose in business, we're not going to invest in you anymore. And these are from the letter, called for a new model of corporate governance, where your strategy, your board, and your purpose are all integrated. If you don't do these things, you no longer will get the support of the largest asset manager in the world. And I think that this is sort of really profound, because what it means for people like us that are or want to be sustainability practitioners is that it means that everybody's going to have to do it. And for a while, a lot of people are going to be faking it. And for a while, a lot of people aren't going to be able to tell the difference between the people that are faking it and the people that aren't. But ultimately, building a business model that's really focused around innovation, where you've got the sustainability built in and the social, environmental, and the financial interests of the business aligned, I believe is the key to being able to create essentially businesses that will be successful in the future. So with that, I'll say thank you and take some questions.
Okay, great. Let's just open it up. Adam can pick. Yeah.
Right there.
You talked about innovation and how you need to ask, is there anything we can make better if we want to start a company? The Good Food Institute has a list of startups they think should be founded. I don't know if you've looked at it or not.
I'm not familiar.
Okay. Well, in your opinion, what are startups or companies that we need urgently right now that are innovative?
Yeah, so I need to repeat the question just for the video. So the question is like, what are the startups that we need right now urgently? I'm going to go left field on this one, okay? I think actually one of the most important things we need right now is we need a social media truth serum. And we need a company, and I don't think this would be that hard, to figure out an overlay on social media to figure out by the credibility of the source what information is true and not. And in order to be able to go from a place where right now, and this is broader than just social media, but kind of online discourse is designed right now to push people towards the polls. It's what the business model is sort of founded off of. And if we can create a business model that can pull people more towards the middle, then we can start to create more civil discourse, which is, I actually think, I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but I will also state that I believe that campaign finance reform is the greatest environmental issue of our time. And it's sort of the apex issue under which a lot of other things fall. And so I think if you could fuel discussion more towards the center, and you could get a little bit of the money out of politics, that's a separate thing. then you could start to make progress on some of these issues that are very obvious: healthcare, individual health, collective health. That the only reason we're not making progress on them is because incumbents don't want us to make progress. So there's a lot there. Didn't mean to go that crazy on that question. Let's go here.
I wanted to double click into your point about almond milk and sustainability.
Yeah.
So I take a company like Kite Hill.
Yep.
Right, almond-based dairy products, started by a very, well-respected scientist, Pat Brown, who also started Impossible Foods. I would argue it's very sustainably focused. So are you suggesting that his efforts to create alternative dairy products through almonds is a step in the wrong direction in terms of making our food system more sustainable?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, because there's not a path for almonds being a sustainable source of that type of food. And not to mention the fact that it's very difficult to get within certain food categories. An almond has about 2.5 times as much fat as it does protein. So if you want to get in something like a milk where its primary nutritional benefit is protein, if you want to get a certain amount of protein, you're going to end up with a very high level of fat and therefore a very high level of calories. That's more on the health side. But yeah, I mean, from an environmental standpoint, one of the interesting things about most almond milks is that they actually have very few almonds in them. They actually contain more sugar than almonds. A brand like Kite Hill, they don't make almond milk, but they do make almond-based products that have lots of almonds in them, but that just makes the water and carbon problem worse, right? And it's trading off of the fact that, oh, it's plant-based, right? And people think, oh, plant-based, that's better than cow-based. When you actually run the numbers on that, it isn't actually true. There's a life cycle assessment on our website that you can look and you can compare dairy milk to almond milk and see the water and carbon benefits or lack thereof if you're interested.
So you mentioned that you're interested in creating products that aren't for green products for non-green people. So when it comes to like marketing your products, like how do you find the balance between like touting some of those sustainability things versus making people think, oh, it's the same thing you already like, but it tastes better?
Yeah. I mean, one of the big reasons that Method was successful or continues to be successful is we made an ordinary cleaning product sort of countertop worthy, right? A dish soap sits out a lot more on your countertop than you actually use it. So we thought, well, you might as well make the thing look nice, right? We have a lot of people that buy our hand wash because it matches the color of their bathroom, right? But what's interesting about that, so 4% of the cleaning category in the United States is green cleaning. So for every green cleaner sold in America, Method and any other brand, there's 24 sold that are the same old kind of crap, right? So that's the point, right? Like if you're not broadening the tent to an audience that's beyond those that are already concerned and using sustainability as a primary or even secondary purchase motivator, then what are you doing it for?
When there are so many different elements and parts of sustainability, and you showed the slide with all your different metrics that you have on your website, how do you end up prioritizing between one and the other, especially when they are in conflict or you have limited resources? Yeah, it's a super, super cool and interesting problem. I mean, this is the sort of sausage making of running a sustainable business. I mean, the way we do it is we look at impact and what can we do to have the most impact. How hard is it, right? Like what resources do we have and how much work is it going to take to get that thing done? And how much does it cost? And you can kind of rack them and stack them based off of that, start at the top of the list and move down, right? Building a factory is one of the most expensive things you can do. It took us 15 years to get to that one, right? But yeah, it's just a basic, honestly, it's no different than any other business planning process. It's exactly the same, except you've got impact in there. It's why it's so important to be able to measure those impacts, because I've been in that conversation before where, I mean, you can imagine it is, right? You've got Billy and you've got Susie, and Billy really wants to work on something that's going to have a water impact because he's passionate about water, and Susie really cares about workers' rights. And then you're having a conversation, what do you do, right? If you don't know your impacts, you can't answer that question. And then you end up picking something, and then somebody's happy and somebody's not. You're not aligned. It's not simple. You haven't solved the sustainability challenges. So, yeah.
So in order to really accomplish this on a large scale, you have to, and you mentioned making things mainstream. And I'm curious, like, at what scale you see that needing to get to, because right now, we have these corporations that are so big and so massive that, like, you were copied on the one-hand laundry detergent.
Yeah.
That can be a good thing to a certain extent if they adopt those sustainability practices, but to, a different argument, we need people like, these companies to become the new huge corporations. So how do you make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting now what's happening. I'll keep the scope of my answer to the consumer product space, which is what I understand. So consumer products companies now average spend about 1 or 1.5% of revenue on R&D. Okay, that's not enough to do anything. I mean, nothing, right? I mean, if you think about the companies that we think of as innovative here in the Valley, for example, right? Generally not consumer products companies, but they're spending 20, 30% of revenue on R&D. So they're kind of stuck, right? They're stuck in this position where they've got these legacy assets and they don't have enough sort of room in their P&L to be able to innovate upon them. They also aren't structured very well for innovation, which is a whole other topic. What's starting to happen now, which is interesting, and this is very different from when I started Method, almost 20 years ago, is they've now realized this, and they've started to consciously use innovative small businesses to start to move their portfolio in the right direction. And some people do it better, and some people don't do it as well. And a lot of it's through acquisition, right? They'll say, okay, and a lot of them are explicit about it. They say, listen, we aren't going to innovate from within, so we're going to let these categories grow up, and then we're going to pick off the ones that are the most innovative and the most successful and help transform our portfolio that way. You've seen, we were talking about Paul Pullman earlier. Paul Pullman at Unilever has done this. He's very conscious about this, right? Trying to bought Ben & Jerry's, bought Seventh Generation, a Method competitor, right? Bringing those in-house and trying to teach the rest of the business to do it. I haven't been on the inside, but I think that there are a lot of examples where that's starting to move those overall portfolios in the right direction toward, a place where those businesses are going to need to be if they're going to ultimately be, sustaining the type of, growth and share price and all the stuff that, the CEOs of those businesses are paid to do. Right here.
So you talked about how sustainability doesn't really sell. You have to be selling a great product. And especially with cleaning products, I think there's a perception that sometimes greener products don't work as well. So how did you kind of make sure that people still wanted to buy your products while also somewhat advertising that it was green?
Yeah. Sorry, I've been forgetting to repeat the question. So it was like, how do you get people in the door believing the fact that your products are going to work and it's not just going to be a trade-off between green and performance? That one's ultimately the proof is in the pudding, and it really is about having a product that does do the job first and foremost. It's a hard thing to market, right? Because think about how cleaning products have traditionally been marketed, right? It's a split-screen television commercial, and Whammo takes 3 squirts, and Kaboom takes 2 squirts, and so buy Kaboom, right? It's like you can't outshout those types of brands. So design plays a part, sampling plays a part, press plays a huge part. So getting earned media to talk about the performance of the products, and then word of mouth, and then fortunately, actually, social media was a tool that became a tool that we could use in the history of Method. We didn't have it when we began. Those are all very sort of tactical elements that you kind of have to use as a portfolio in order to continue to, over time, to build the equity in the brand that, hey, these products really work. Because there isn't really a solution, sort of air cover, mass broadcast media that is convincing, that would convince you that, hey, this green cleaning product works, because it's sort of a notion that has to be broken down in your own psychology. So, yeah, we'll go here and then we'll go back there. Yeah.
So I know that you use recycled plastic for your bottles. How sustainable is your yellow pea supply? Where do you get them from? And are you ever considering doing indoor yellow pea growing, as Plenty is doing?
So the question was, how sustainable is our yellow pea supply? So So first thing, peas are a legume, so they fix their own nitrogen. So they don't require very much fertilizer at all. There's very little fertilizer used in those products. And also because the way they're farmed, they retain more of the carbon in the soil, right? You don't have to till the soil with a pea. They're grown generally in the upper Midwest. They're a rotational crop, so they grow in the fall, spring and the fall. And they grow where it rains. So they're generally non-irrigated crops. And because of those things, that's the reason why the water footprint is much lower than something like a nut, or the carbon footprint's much lower because you're not moving anything really to get it there. What that looks like is the carbon footprint of a pea is about 75% lower than that of an almond on a weight for weight basis. The water footprint's about 96% lower, just to kind of put some numbers on it. In terms of moving to urban agriculture, so I'm a big fan of urban agriculture. I'm actually on the board of a company called Aero Farms, which is an aeroponic indoor farming company based in New Jersey. And so I think there's some incredibly interesting technology happening there. We have not looked at all at indoor farming for peas, primarily because we use a lot of peas. Millions of pounds of peas. What we're doing right now is actually contracting directly with farmers to get soil to shelf traceability on our peas. So that's what we're doing this year. I don't know, maybe in the future we'll be growing them indoors. That would be cool. Yeah.
Without sort of lamenting on the state of capitalism in the United States or the mass consolidation that's happening in the CPG brands right now, do you see a possibility, or maybe with your company, a different sustainable path that is actually not through acquisition, and in fact going against the Procter & Gamble's?
Yeah. The question is, do you see a different path than acquisition ultimately as an end state for a business? Yes, and I really, really hope so. There's actually some really interesting work that some people are doing now on things like longer-term stock exchanges. And there's actually one called the Long-Term Stock Exchange. A lot of work going on in the B Corp and benefit corporation corporate governance communities around this type of stuff. I'm involved in a little bit of that on the B Corp side. And the idea is essentially, how do you redefine fiduciary duty as not just a financial outcome, but a financial, social, and environmental outcome? We actually manage our businesses that way already. Method did get acquired. What's interesting is there's now a path where more businesses are resisting the sort of quarterly profit thing in the regular markets. But maybe inherent in your question, and I'm not sure, but maybe this is just the way I think, is that I also think that you've got to have an exchange where that is valued more than the current exchanges. And when that happens, I think you're going to have a lot more companies that are going to be able to have a path toward shareholder returns, other than just selling to a larger company and helping to try to change their culture from within.
Ideally exemplifying it for the traditional companies.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, there's only three ways to get liquidity in a company, right? It's like public, private, and strategic. Sure. We know about the strategic. The private is just delaying the other two, so we need a public market.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, in trying to build a sustainable business, obviously there's certain things that you're doing like LCAs that other businesses aren't doing. So when you're thinking about personnel and the kind of people that you're bringing in, what are the functions that you see that are very different that you might hire for that another company wouldn't?
Yeah, the question is, how do we hire differently for the types of functions that are required to do this type of stuff? So, ultimately for me, it all comes down to innovation, right? And innovation is a mindset that you need to be long on creativity, and you need to have processes within a business that can foster innovation and creativity. And so there's office design parts of that, there's process parts of that, and then of course there's people parts of that. So that's kind of a mindset thing. Generally, what we're looking for is people that have a balance between sort of left brain and right brain capabilities, right? Even if they are a hardcore left brain job task. We want to see that that ability to go, kind of across the business, because ultimately innovation and sustainability, for that matter, being an innovation function, is it's by nature cross-functional, right? And so you've got to be able to communicate and connect and understand the other functions in a business. It never works as a siloed kind of thing. I don't know if this is where your question was going, but I also am, I think structuring sustainability in a business is really, really important. I think the wrong way to do it is to have a sustainability department. That never works. You've actually got to build it into everyone's role, and there can be people that help guide that and push it through the organization, but ultimately everybody's got to have that in their goals, in their incentives and compensation, and that's why the left brain, right brain balance becomes important, because you're still a subject matter expert, but you got to be able to go across. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about why you don't prefer the one-for-one business model.
Yeah. So, and this is, this is a personal opinion, and it's a personal thing of mine. Business is the largest and most powerful institution on the planet, and I believe that it has not only the opportunity, but the onus to create social and environmental good. When I worked at the Carnegie Institution, I was a climate scientist. I built computer models, and I ran computer models. The point of that work was to do climate science that led to policy change, right? Sound policy. That didn't happen 20 years ago. It still doesn't happen, right? I got really frustrated with that work for that reason. And I also got frustrated because as a consumer, I was buying all these products that were just terrible products. But their proposition was, the earth is dying and you need to save it. So buy this really, brown, awful, expensive, doesn't work, doesn't taste good kind of thing. And I think that what we've got to do is we've got to turn that on its head. And if you're designing your business to create impact and a ripple effect, now you know I called my second company Ripple, then it deserves to get 100% of the investment to reinvest back into more innovation to make it more sustainable. And that's why aligning this financial, social, and environmental interests are so important. I'm not saying that it's bad to do a one-for-one model. It's just, if you're doing that model, by definition, you're taking resources away from that model, that business, that could be used to invest in more sustainable innovation. And I want to invest in sustainable innovation. So we'll go here again.
Going a bit off the question he asked about companies innovation, so I have a lot of friends interested in starting their own companies, especially in the Silicon Valley area, and it seems to me there's a bit of overcrowding of startups in this plant-based field especially. Would you say that we do need all these startups, or should some people actually look more into joining existing companies and they could be more beneficial there?
Yeah, the question is, should you start a new company or go work at a bigger one? I think that's a personal choice. I think it's just a pure personal choice. And there are a lot of, startups, and there are a lot of places that are crowded. I think that's great. I think more startups are just more competition, and it's better. It makes everybody better. Ultimately, there's consolidation. Some make it, some don't, right? But whether you want to change from the inside in a large company, or whether you've got the skill set to kind of create it yourself, is really a matter of taste. Yeah, I think there was a question there.
Yeah, and you talked about how just
Maybe
having
you did the last question, so I think there's one here too. So go ahead.
You talked about having a sustainability team or department isn't the right way to go about it, and that might be easy to kind of incorporate in a small business or startup that's not really established yet. But how would you go about integrating sustainability throughout the company in a very established old?
Yeah, I've studied a couple of these models. So method, for example, I did this. So we had employees in 4 continents and over 500 people when we were doing this. So it's no Unilever, but it's pretty big. And you're talking about 18 time zones and many different languages that you're trying to coordinate this across. The way we structured it is that we did have a small team of sustainability professionals, okay? And that team at that scale was 4 people, okay? But the role of those people was to integrate sustainability into every job in the company, and to help teach people it, how to give them the skills and the capabilities that they needed to integrate into them, and then also help them figure out what was most important to integrate, right? By measuring it, knowing the impact, showing the impacts, that sort of thing. And so, I don't know if you want to call it that, that was is almost a derivative function. It was sort of a teaching function to the rest of the organization. And that was because right now we live in a world, well, there's just not that capability. That's not a basic capability that most people have. So you had to teach it to your own organization. That's how we structured it. But it didn't, I was called the chief greenskeeper. That was the group was called Greenskeeping. So it went straight to the top. It didn't roll up to marketing. It didn't roll up to supply chain. It didn't roll up to a functional leader that had a functional perspective, and that was the point. So, was there a question here?
So kind of in regards to the previous question from up in the corner, and you mentioned value not just based on financial metrics and also including those environmental and social factors, but the thing is it becomes an apples to oranges comparison at a certain point, and I'm curious, like, just within your guys' own team, if you ever have had to come down to the hard question of like, okay, let's try to put a dollar amount or like actually quantify the social or environmental impact, and if so, how, and like how difficult is that to do?
All the time, right?
Is dollars like the fundamental unit that you break?
Well, no, it's 1 of 6, right? In this, so I didn't spend much time on this, right? Wastewater and energy are obvious, right? For those of you familiar with B Corp, that's like at the company level, not at a product level. It's sort of, policies and procedures around community and governance and that sort of thing. This is a material health score. So all those little green, yellow, red things that I showed kind of roll up to, if you can imagine, sort of an aggregate, material health type of score. And then there's money, right? So I think, yeah, you very often can't say, like, how much is 3/4 of a liter worth in dollars, right? Like, I don't know, right? But what's important is that you can create this visibility at an individual decision level, so that when you say, hey, I want to move from this product format to that product format, you can say, okay, we're going to get X on water, we're going to get Y on carbon, our waste is going to go up. That's bad, right? And it's going to be X investment to get there, right? Or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's easy when they all align, but when they don't, that's the sausage making. And that's what you get paid to do, right? Ultimately, my greenskeeping group at Method, and similar thing at Ripple, like, that's why people do it. Otherwise, you could run a software program that would tell you the answer to that. At the end of the day, it's a values-based judgment about, like, and I will tell you that at Method, like, we did great on carbon, we did great on waste. Like, our water was always super hard for us, right? And so the way that would work is if we had something that really helped us on water, we were willing to invest a little bit more for it, right? Because that just makes sense in terms of the destination that you're trying to solve for. So hopefully that kind of creates a picture for it. Like, that's where it gets fun, right? Because that's where you're saying, okay, I've got 50 different things I can do, but now I know, at least, if I do all, I can look at all 50 of them and know the pros and cons of each one of them, and then I can say, okay, what resources do I have, what capabilities do I have, and how do I move from where I am to where I want to go? So, you want to ask the final one?
Good, yeah, if everyone's okay with one last question. I just think it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit about your leadership journey, and it might include moments of inspiration that gave you aha moments in your childhood or career that led to certain decisions, or insights you've gleaned from having been a leader for almost 20 years.
That's deep. Let's see. So everybody kind of has their own sort of moment when they start to care really deeply about social, environmental issues, right? So for me, it actually happened at Stanford, and it was very academic and kind of boring, which was, we were talking earlier, I took one class that wasn't for my major or a requirement at Stanford, which was unfortunate. But that class was about the ecosystems of California.
That class, Hal Mooney.
Hal Mooney, yeah. And that was where I started to really realize the interconnectedness of different things, right? And that kind of opened up my mind to a bunch of different stuff, kind of led to a bunch of different things. So I'd say like that was one at sort of an impetus level. The second was, I was a climate scientist, but I wasn't a very good one. And I quickly realized that like going deep in a discipline was just like, I wasn't great at it, and I was really kind of bored by it. And that kind of jived with this whole idea of kind of looking across, like, how does this impact sort of that, right? And then I think the third was just, diving in, right? I started a company when I was 25, raised a bunch of venture capital, worked 24 hours, 7 days a week for longer than I would like to admit, and learned a lot of lessons about how to try to lead a company, right? I'm trying to lead a company, I was 25, right? And that was really a very personal journey around, it was really about self-awareness and understanding. Now we're getting very deep, but the big journey for me was realizing that the way people viewed me was often very different than the way I thought they viewed me. And it was really important to understand how people viewed you in order to be effective in the way that you ultimately lead people. Because leadership is about inspiration, but it's also about consistency, and it's about appealing to people and connecting with people. And if you think they think you are one thing and you're something else, it's hard to lead.
Yeah, they say with branding, your brand is not what you say you are, it's what other people say you are. That's your brand identity. It's not what, you claim to be.
Yeah.
Say, so.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Get up and give you a proper thank you.
Yeah.